Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. A rainy Sunday afternoon. Yeah, it's really, really lovely to be here in this space in particular. I'm enjoying being in this space. Yeah, so when I heard the title of the festival this year, Kiss the Earth, and was asked if I would give a talk, the very first thing that came to my mind was a Rumi quote that you might be familiar with. So there's a poem, and the end of it is, "Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground." So this sort of came to my mind quite instantly, yes, that's what I'd like to talk about. And the bit that particularly stood out for me was hundreds of ways. And I guess that's because it reminded me of what it is that I really value about the Dharma. And that's that we don't have to be a certain personality to practice it. We don't have to look a certain way. We don't have to connect with a certain thing. The Dharma really can speak to everybody because it's the truth. And I just value that very, very much. And the fact that if given the right conditions, everyone can respond to the Dharma. And I just love the fact that we all respond to slightly different things. So we'll all know in our lives there's just something different that makes us spark or makes us tick. And I just really enjoy that about human beings. I just sort of love the whole range of ways that can be expressed in human beings. So that then reminded me of the Buddha. And the Buddha's, from what I hear of his life, his flexibility, his spontaneity, and his responsiveness to many, many, many different beings in many different ways. And I think that's what inspires me the most about the Buddha. Like he just, he had no sort of self to get in the way of interactions or to make things messy. There was just this sort of pure responsiveness to beings. And responding in whatever way was most helpful for beings. So I find that really inspiring and really exciting, and I can very much sort of get behind that as an ideal that I want to live by. But that doesn't mean that I find it easy to do that. It is an ideal. Yeah, so when I was thinking of this area, the other image that came was the image of a Dakini. So some of you might have heard of a Dakini. So a Dakini is a sky dancer. So just that image is quite evocative, isn't it? Like dancing in the sky. And the thing that I find beautiful about the Dakini is that she can move in any single direction at any time. There's this sort of total freedom in the vast blue sky, sort of infinite sky. The Dakini moves freely, boundlessly, and in an unrestricted way. And I guess that image for me is just that, that is how I would love to live my life. I'd love to be able to move around and just feel totally unrestricted, boundless, not restricted by all these views, opinions, assumptions, habits, tendencies that kind of can keep me small and keep me not really able to move very easily. And then the other image that came was that of Padma Sambhava. So some of you might know of Padma Sambhava, who's a figure who brought the Buddhism to Tibet. But there's these wonderful sort of myths around his life as well, very sort of colourful, rich myths. And one of the things about Padma Sambhava is he has a number of different manifestations. So there's not just one image of what he looks like. I don't know how many there are. There's a lot. But apparently there are these 8 that are sort of a bit more well known. And yeah, so some of them, I'll just read some of them out. So there's the lake-born Vajra. There's the lion of the Shakyas, the rays of the sun, the lotus-born, the wise seeker of the sublime, the lotus king, the lion's roar, and the wild, wrathful Vajra. So they're the 8 manifestations. And they don't depict different Padma Sambhavas, but they reflect Padma Sambhava's ability to appear according to what's needed and to respond according to what's needed. So it's this idea of like shape shifting, just being able to do whatever's needed at the time. So I'm going to share with you some stories from the Buddha's life, which really inspire me, and that sort of reflect this ideal of how the Buddha was able to respond differently. So I've got this lovely little book here. If you've not seen it, I would really recommend it. So it's by Sadhaloka. There's just some very beautiful stories from the Buddha's life, encounters with enlightenment. So the first story, some of you may be familiar with, is that of Kisa Gotami. So Kisa Gotami was a mother, and in the time of the Buddha, and her son tragically died despite all of her best efforts to keep him alive. And of course, she was just filled with an extremely strong grief at the death of her son. And yeah, I can just really understand this, that she refused to believe that her son was dead. So she clung to him, she held him. She refused to believe because of the pain of that suffering. And her family and friends, tried to get her to understand that her son was dead, but yeah, she just couldn't respond to that. So they heard of the Buddha, who was known to have powers, and they said, "Oh, why don't you go and see the Buddha and see if he can help?" And the Buddha said, "Yes, I can help you. Go and find me a mustard seed." So this gave Kisa Gotami a lot of hope. She felt a lot of hope. She thought, oh, every village, every house in the village in India will have a mustard seed. Like, surely I can easily find a mustard seed. And she hoped that this might be medicine to bring her son to life. And then the Buddha said, "There's just one condition. Bring me a mustard seed from a household where no one has died." And Kisa Gotami still felt hope. She thought, yes, I can do that, I can do that. So she started to go from house to house and ask for a mustard seed. And the householders were very freely giving her a mustard seed. And then she remembered this condition from the Buddha, it has to be from a household where no one's died. And so she'd ask, has anyone died in this household? And they'd say yes. Please don't remind us of the pain of that grief. And slowly, as Kisa Gotami went from door to door, the truth of impermanence and that we all will die started to sink in for her more and more. And she was able then to accept that she wasn't alone in that loss, that we all experience loss in that way. And she went to the Buddha and she said, the medicine has worked. So what she meant was that his teaching had helped her realize the truth of impermanence. And then she did, because of that teaching from the Buddha and the Buddha's compassion, the way that the Buddha responded in that way, she then later took refuge and became enlightened. I just find that very beautiful and moving, that story. So the Buddha didn't try and tell Kusagotami what to do or try and sort of impart any teaching on her. But he knew that she needed a compassionate, kind response, but also that she needed to find her own way. She needed to find that truth by herself. It wouldn't sort of work if someone told her those things. She needed to sort of find her way. Okay, so move on to the second story. So this is a story of a wealthy Brahmin who was a landowner. And one day, all of the sort of farmers and ploughmen were queuing up for their lunch. So they were stood in a queue waiting to be fed as they were working. And the Buddha was begging for his food at this time. So he went and joined the line with his begging bowl. And the Brahmin said to the Buddha, "Oh, you know, what, you've not done a day's work like anybody else. Why would I give you any food? You know, you don't plough, you don't sow." And the Buddha said, "Oh, I do plough, and I do sow." And the Brahmin sort of laughed, you know, "Oh, what sort of farming do you do?" He knew he was a holy man, you know, he was sort of a wandering person. So these are the words, this is the Buddha's response. "Faith is the seed I sow, and self-control is my rein. Wisdom is my yoke and plough. Conscience is my guiding pole, and mind is the rope I hold. Mindfulness is my goad. Guarded in every act of body and speech, moderate in what I eat. With truth I destroy all weeds. In calm I find release. Energy is the yoked oxen that carries me to perfect freedom without my ever looking back. This is the ploughing that I do, and it has the deathless as its fruit. Whoever ploughs like this will be freed from all suffering." So the Brahmin was sort of inspired by these words and impressed by these words. And he offered the Buddha food. These words sort of moved him. They spoke to him in his own language. He understood those words. They spoke to him in the language that he knew, so he offered the Buddha some food. There is a bit more to that story, but I think that's enough to demonstrate. Yeah, so again, it's like the Buddha was, he wasn't just using one way of teaching or one way of sort of sharing the Dharma. He was understanding this person and what it was that they needed and the sort of language that would work for them and how they might respond to that. Okay, so on to the third story. And this is Karshapur, the fire worshippers. So yeah, as it sounds, there were these clans who would worship fire. They would spend the night in fire chambers and perform ritual worships there. So the Buddha, as he was wandering, came across these people, and he asked if he could spend the night in the fire chamber. And Karshapur said, "Well, yes, you can, but there's a terrible naga, so this sort of dragon-like serpent, and it will, you know, it's pretty certain that this naga will kill you if you spend the night in the chamber." So the Buddha was happy to try. He sat in the cave with the naga to meditate, And the Naga became angry at this person that was in his space, so he filled the chamber with smoke. And in response, the Buddha produced smoke from his body and filled the chamber with even more smoke. So then the Naga started producing these flames. And in response, the Buddha started flaming. And Karshapur was sat by watching the cave and just saw the cave up in smoke and flames. And he just thought, gosh, the Buddha, he must be dead. That monk who's in there, he must be dead. But in the morning, the Buddha emerged totally unhurt, with the Naga as a small snake coiled in his begging bowl. So that's just a really beautiful image, isn't it? So Karshapur was quite impressed by this, but he still thought he was better than the Buddha. Anyway, later the Buddha was teaching in the forest, and 4 kings visited him. And the forest became filled with light as the Buddha taught. So the Buddha's teaching just sort of produced this beautiful light. And again, Karshapur was impressed, but still, he was still a bit wary. So Karshapur was going to hold a fire ceremony. These fire worshippers, they held ceremonies in the village. And he was a bit nervous. He was starting to feel like, this figure, the Buddha, he's definitely got something. Like, he felt a little bit nervous that people would come and that the Buddha might outperform him. So the Buddha actually was able to read Karshapur's thoughts, and he knew that Karshapur would feel sort of nervous. So the Buddha didn't go to the ceremony. And later he told Karshapur, I didn't come. I knew that would be difficult. I read your mind. And Karshapur was just a bit disconcerted by this, but still not totally impressed by the Buddha. And again, the Buddha, the Buddha was just being himself, and Karshapur was sort of filled with pride and not quite able to see that the Buddha had something that he didn't. So the Buddha decided that a short, sharp shock was needed for Karshapur, the Vajra-like element. And he very clearly said, "You're not an enlightened master, Karshapur, nor are you on the way to becoming one. Nothing you are doing will enable you to become one or to enter the path of enlightenment." And that message from the Buddha and the way that the Buddha delivered it was enough for Karshapur to see through and to realize that the Dharma was the truth. So again, the Buddha, it's like, I just love that story. It's like the Buddha was sort of just being himself, and Karshapur was sort of impressed but a bit wary, and also he had pride and wanted to be better than the Buddha. And the only thing that would sort of cut through in the end was this sort of more Vajric approach after the Buddha had just been himself and just demonstrated the sort of his consciousness, what the power that his consciousness had. Yeah, so I just love these stories from the Buddha's life. The Buddha took people in. He really took people in. And it wasn't about him or the knowledge that he wanted to impart, but it's about what he could do that would truly help that person see the truth for themselves. The Buddha had nothing to prove. He was just meeting people with the wisdom that he'd accomplished and the compassion that very naturally arose when he met suffering beings. So my question and what inspires me is, how can I practice responsiveness like that in my own life? Not for any purpose, but to just respond to people. I find that really inspiring. So in a way, just for the sake of empathy, of meeting people where they're at, of communicating in ways that that are important to people. And of getting myself out the way, I find that's something quite liberating, of like it not being sort of about me being at the centre, but just like, can I really see and really meet someone else? And I guess, the Buddha was just sort of free from the oppressive nature of his views, his opinions, of ill will, of pride and conceit. So how to do that? I think, firstly, we have to do the work of knowing what really matters to us, so what's of value to us. And I think this can take just some deep listening to what our own values are. What is it that we resonate with? And also just reflection, just sort of turning that over in our mind. What's important to us in our lives? What's in our hearts? What's deeply in our hearts? And, little clues can help us with this, just noticing what things we respond to. Yeah, I remember like the first time I came to Buddhafield and the area of sort of the green crafts, and just seeing some of the sort of symbolism there. And I didn't know what it was, but I just felt myself sort of responding. There was something in me that sort of wanted to be near that, in that area. So yeah, we can do this. We can sort of listen in to what is it that we respond to? What is it that sort of makes us spark? So yeah, the Buddha had this sort of natural responsiveness. He saw and realized that different people need different things. But he didn't have any investment in proving himself, in being right, in wanting to be liked, because he didn't have an identification as sort of fixed and separate. And for us, I'll speak for myself, I really, really value and appreciate difference in other beings, and I'm sure many of you here do appreciate difference, diversity. But when it comes down to it, day to day, and I'm, in contact with someone, it can be really hard to just let go of the way that I do things and thinking that that's the right way. So, righteous indignation, even if with things like someone was telling a story the other day about being on retreat and they were chopping the carrots in a particular way, and they saw someone else chopping the carrots just totally differently, and they just couldn't believe that someone would chop the carrots so differently from them. It's so typical, isn't it? Like, we can be on a retreat and we're but it's like little things like how someone chops the carrots or how someone washes the pots and stacks them on the draining board. Like, for me, no matter how much I value difference and people, it's like when it comes down to those little things, that's really what gets in the way. That's what niggles. Yeah. So yeah, I think we do have to be in connection with what matters to us. What does kissing the earth mean for us? What are those deep values for us? And I think if we can become more connected to that and sort of more confident in that, then in a way, the less it will matter how other beings are. It's like we can just sort of be grounded within ourselves and within what matters. Yeah, so for me, it's really important to feel that in my body, and when I'm with others and I feel these sort of senses of difficulty arising or moments of tension when I see something that I think, how can they be doing it like that? Just sort of really having a sense of ease, softness, letting go, breathing, just sort of remembering what's important and how I want to live and how I want to be in relation to others. And when I'm in touch with that myself, I can then be much more fluid and responsive with others, even if they do see things really differently to me. So yeah, just this question of like, why should my way be the only way? I just sort of ask myself that over and over again, and of course it's not, but in the moment we often feel like our way is the only way. But there's just something about reflecting, you know, why would we think that is, yeah. So another little story, which you might have heard of, from the Udana, about how we do all see even the same thing in different ways. So this is the blind men and the elephant. So the Buddha says, suppose there are these blind men who are led to an elephant and they're asked to describe what it's like. One man might feel the elephant's ear and say, an elephant is like a big fan. Another blind man feels the elephant's leg and says, well, an elephant is like a trunk, a tree trunk. And then another blind man comes and feels the elephant's trunk and says, no, you're both wrong. An elephant is like a big snake. And then another man comes and feels the elephant's tail and says, you're all wrong, like you're all getting it wrong. An elephant's like a brush or a broom. And they keep arguing with each other. They each know that what they've felt is right. That is what an elephant is. So then a man with good sight comes and leads each of the blind men to feel all the different parts of the elephant. And of course, okay, they're all right. And actually they're all wrong. An elephant is much more than they could have imagined themselves. So there's something there about that sort of perspective, just seeing the bigger picture, just like zooming out and not just focusing in on what we think or what we know or what we recognize. There's just so many ways of seeing things that are conditioned by so many things in our life, and we will all respond in very different ways. But when we're in the grip of our views or that righteous indignation, thinking that we're right, it can be quite difficult to just take a step back, can't it, in those moments? One of the things that really helps me in those moments is just, as much as I can, bringing a sense of curiosity, play, and lightness. And of course, like, I can't just bring that there and then. It's like, I have to be living my life like that in order to bring that there and then. Otherwise, in that moment, how am I going to be able to respond with lightness if I'm, not sort of cultivating that? And similarly, with just a broader sense of positive emotion, just kind of building up a well of positive emotion, so that when I'm met with something difficult, there is just a response, a positive response. Yeah, so I just, as much as possible, would like to be able to meet people with love, with kindness, with curiosity, with play, with interest. But sometimes we need something a bit different. Like sometimes for myself, I need a bit of energy, like to shake myself out of something. The other day I got into a bit of a difficult communication with someone, and I felt myself right in the grip of that sort of righteousness of feeling like I was right. And it was really painful. But actually what was even more painful was that the thought came to my mind, like I could do something differently here. So the thought came, which was great, but I couldn't get myself there. It was like still the grip of like wanting to be right was still stronger. And that was so painful. It was like I could see there was a different way of being. I could see there was a different way of responding. And yet that the grip of that sort of tight state was still strong. But I guess, that's good, isn't it? There's a sense of like, it is possible. And the more we practice in that moment of like the gap and just seeing that, the more it becomes possible. So just coming back to that sense of freedom, moving in lots of different directions, being able to move like the Dakini or like the Buddha in his responsiveness. So is it really possible to act spontaneously? That's just a question. Is that really possible for us? For myself, I know that my patterns, my tendencies and habits are just much stronger than I realise. Yes, it is possible to choose, but as I was saying, like often there's something else that kind of drives us a bit more strongly. So I used to work for the Karana Trust, which is a charity, and I used to do door knocking as a spiritual practice. So fundraising for charities in India, small charities in India. And I loved the thought that when I was going and knocking on these doors and meeting strangers, the thought that I could be whoever I wanted to be. It was like these people behind the doors, they don't know me, they've never met me. I can just be whoever I want to. I found that really, really liberating. And at times, if I were really grounded and connected, I could just go and I could meet someone and just totally live in the way that I wanted to, in line with my values, meeting this person, really taking them in. And then at other times, it was sort of humbling how strong my habits were, and how even though those people had never met me, it was me that was restricting myself. It's like there was no restriction coming from them. And yet I was sort of still fitting this mold of being small and being someone that I didn't really want to be. So yeah, it's just quite a thing to look and see that, like how deeply ingrained our habits can be. And again, in those moments, it's like, oh, all I could do was just let go of these thoughts that would add on to that and make it worse, and just come back to sensations in the body. Just keep coming back to the body, the breath, and as much as possible, just bringing that sense of ease and lightness. Yeah, so just to end, we sort of, back to that quote, there are hundreds of ways to kiss the earth. So we all have different things that we connect to, that we connect with, different ways of expressing our values, different ways of expressing our gratitude, of connecting with beauty. And we all have our own conditioning, so we'll all respond to different things or to the same thing in very different ways. I loved the Alan Watts quote in the programme. You didn't come into this world, you came out of it, like a wave from the ocean. You are not a stranger here. So we're all waves from the ocean, but all those waves look different. They're different sizes, they're different strengths, they're different shapes. And the thing that inspires me is just sort of finding out what sort of wave am I meeting right now? What makes this person spark? What is it that they respond to? What matters to them? So some of you might have heard the parable of the rain cloud. So this is the fact that the Dharma is like one big rain cloud that rains down, and beings are like different forms of vegetation, different herbs, different trees, different grasses, different flowers. And the Dharma can rain down, and each of those sort of plants just does what they do. They just grow in their shape, in their form. And that's just so beautiful, you know, that's what we're like. We're each different grasses, and we don't need to grow into, a grass doesn't need to grow into a flower. A grass just grows as grass, which is beautiful in its own right. So I'm just going to read the end of that. an adaptation by Ratnaprabha. So the Buddha's unbiased teaching is like the one rain, but beings, according to their capacities, receive it differently, just as the plants and trees each take a varying supply. The Buddha, by this image, skillfully reveals his methods, and with various expressions, he proclaims the one single Dharma, the one essential Dharma to be practiced according to ability, just as those thickets, forests, herbs and trees, true to their type, grow lush and beautiful. Just so, practicing it step by step, all can gain the fruit of the way. So yeah, that is what I love about the Dharma, that people can respond in so many different ways. Just thinking about, obviously I'm in the Triratna movement, and within this movement, people express their going for refuge, their Dharma practice in so many different ways. For some people, the myth of the hermit and meditation is very central. Some find Dharma practice through parenting, working in retreat centres, a practice of beauty, finding beauty. For some people, the environment and the climate emergency are a key part of their practice. Dharma study. Yeah, there's just so many different ways, and I find that really inspiring. And what I want to do is sort of loosen a bit and just let go of the way that I sort of hold on to my own views, my own opinions and thoughts, and try and open to others and the beauty and creativity which is expressed through others. So I'll just end with my favourite quote from Sangharakshita, the founder of Triratna. This is one of the reasons why I am a Buddhist. I believe that humanity is basically one. I believe that it is possible for any human being to communicate with any other human being, to feel for any other human being, to be friends with any other human being. This is what I truly and deeply believe. Thank you.